What's up, sports fans? This is the NCAA College Sports Channel. It is time to give you my Week 7 college football takeaways from the 2025 college football season. Week 7 brought absolute chaos from stunning upsets to statement victories, and we're going to break down all the key storylines and surprises, and from another wild weekend across the country. And we're also halfway through the college football season, which doesn't seem like, it seems like yesterday that we started this season, and, it started with Week 1 on Labor Day weekend with the biggest weekend of college football in the month of September. But I got to tell you, Week 7 was another big weekend of college football. I think this was the biggest weekend of the month of October. And also, we're a couple weeks away from the first ever college football playoff top 25 rankings. It's going to be wild. I just feel like after this past weekend, especially from yesterday and also the Friday night games, I think things are going to be starting to heat up. And you're probably going to see a ton of parity for the rest of the way as we head into the second half of the college football season. So let's jump into the most important takeaways that I saw, and I will break them down for you. And we'll start here with takeaway number 1, and that comes in the Big Ten. Indiana and Ohio State are at the top of the Big Ten. I think that was made pretty clear yesterday, especially after the way that Ohio State and Indiana both picking up huge wins on the road. Now, I think Indiana had the more exciting win than Ohio State did. Ohio State, though, took care of business against Illinois like I thought they would. I knew Illinois was not ready for this big-time game, and Ohio State played really good defense in this game. Ohio State might have the best defense in the country once again. Now, there are some other teams out there that might have a better defense than Ohio State does, but they're playing lesser opponents, and they're also playing that, teams that are, really just not on Ohio State's level. So, yeah, Ohio State, again, they made a pretty big statement here against Illinois, not just by winning, but also kind of proving to themselves that they are the team to beat in the entire country. And I will talk about that a little bit later here in this takeaways video, but I'm going to talk about the Indiana and Oregon game. This was a pretty big game. College game day was down here. You had a battle of unbeaten teams, both teams coming out of bye weeks. Indiana going out west, that was definitely a major concern here for Indiana, but it didn't prove to be because Indiana defeated Oregon 30-20. This was a huge win here for this Indiana football team and for Kirk Zanetti as the head coach of Indiana in his second year. He's already proven that he's a great coach, and this Indiana football team is just really built, just for the big-time game. And they didn't win those big games last year in the playoff and then also against Ohio State. They got blown out in those two big games, but they did not get blown out in this one. Now, I picked Oregon to win this game because I wasn't feeling confident with Indiana to go out west and beat Oregon on the road in this very tough environment, but still, they were able to do that, and Indiana just looked like a pretty good football team. I got to give credit to their defense, though. That defense played pretty well. They were getting pressure on Dante Moore in the pocket, and Dante Moore, yeah, he can escape from pressure, but he was getting tackled automatically. Indiana tackled really well in this game, and they were just pressuring Dante Moore every single time. So, yeah, this is just a different Indiana football team, and I think, it's definitely a better football team compared to last year. Now, I'm not saying that Indiana, this football team is better than last year's team. Curtis, Warwick was a great quarterback for them, but I think Fernando Mendoza, with his running ability and Indiana's explosive offense, this is a really good football team. And yeah, I think with these two victories for these two teams, Indiana and Ohio State are at the top of the Big Ten because Penn State now all of a sudden looks terrible. They lost to Northwestern 22-21. Drew Aller is going to be out for the rest of the year. Yeah, that's a big question there for Penn State. And you look at Indiana, they have to play Penn State on the road, but that's looking like a game where Indiana might win easily. And they also could be the favorite in that game. So, yeah, Indiana doesn't have a very tough schedule the rest of the way. Ohio State, they still have to play Penn State as well, but they don't have to play Oregon. And I don't think they have a tougher road game test coming up either time soon. So, yeah, these two teams, they have schedules that set up so well for them. And this is looking like the potential Big Ten championship matchup. Now, I don't think this loss really affects Oregon. I still think they can run the table and possibly make it to the Big Ten championship at least. East. So yeah, Ohio State and Indiana are at the top of the Big Ten just based off of what they did, of course, yesterday. So that's takeaway number one. Let's go to takeaway number two, and let's talk about the SEC. But really, this big takeaway here is just about Texas. The real Texas finally shows up, and they did against Oklahoma. This was a big game coming up here in the Red River rivalry, although I feel like Oklahoma going into this game was the better team, and I feel like they were the more talented team and the more physical team. And the outcome of this game was about how I expected it to go, a defensive battle until the second half, where Texas outscored Oklahoma 20-0, I believe, in that second half. So, yeah, Texas, they finally showed up here, against their rivals, Oklahoma. I was really surprised of how Texas played in this one, and Arch Manning looked like the real Arch Manning that we saw in the preseason. He was 21-27 for this game, only threw a touchdown pass, but it was a much-needed touchdown pass in the second half. So, yeah, the real Texas finally showed up here, and I gotta tell you, I feel like there's been a lot of rumors out there that there has been no elite team in the SEC this year. I feel like as of right now, Ole Miss and Texas A&M are at the top because those two teams are unbeaten. But you got a ton of parity in this conference. I mean, it's kind of going back to last year where there was a ton of parity, and you had Texas and Georgia kind of run away with it, but nobody has been able to kind of run away with it. I still feel like Texas A&M and Ole Miss are not really that far ahead of the rest of the SEC. It's pretty much them against the entire rest of the SEC because I feel like it's kind of a big way tie here for the third place spot and then also the fourth place spot. It's going to be a ton of parity the rest of the way here in the SEC in the second half of the year. But I kind of wanted to also touch on the Auburn and Georgia game last night. Boy, there was a lot of controversial calls in that game. You had Auburn get off to a really good start in the first half. They were the completely better team in that first half. I mean, they had over 200 and something yards of offense, and they should have been up 17-0 at the half. But instead, they had the overturned call on the goal line where Jackson Arnold fumbled the football, which I think it should have been a touchdown. I think it was a controversial call. And look, I'm not an Auburn hater. I mean, I had to really, give Auburn credit what they did in the first half. And you look at Georgia, they were definitely the better team in the second half. I don't know what happened to Auburn in the second half of that game. It just looked like they were completely sloppy. And yeah, Georgia just overall made adjustments like they always do. It kind of goes back to the Tennessee game. They were down pretty big early on in that game, and they came back and just made adjustments. That's how Georgia is. They fill out the team first, and then they kind of make adjustments to see how they can make those adjustments work. So, yeah, but the big picture here is that real Texas finally showed up. I mean, John Mateer played in this game. I think it was really risky to play him in this one, especially after having the surgery on the injured hand. I mean, I don't know why they would play him in this game. This was not the real John Mateer that we saw here in the first half of the year against the wins against Michigan and then also Auburn. So, yeah, Oklahoma, they definitely, the loss doesn't really affect them, but, it was a bad performance by John Mateer, and he had 3 interceptions in that game as well. So, yeah, the real Texas did finally show up here. The other SEC games that we saw Tennessee survive against Arkansas. That was a pretty good game there. Texas A&M took care of business against Florida, even though if you watch that game, it was kind of close throughout the entire game because, Florida's defense shows up in these games, but their offense can't do anything. LSU defeated South Carolina 20-10. Yeah, the SEC is really starting to heat up here as we head into the second half of the year. But yeah, that's takeaway number 2. The real Texas finally shows up. Let's go to takeaway number 3, and that's in the Big 12. It's now Texas Tech and BYU versus the rest of the Big 12. I think that's really clear. This is a conference which has a ton of parity every year, but you look at Texas Tech and BYU. Those two teams are still unbeaten. Texas Tech, I feel like, is the best team in this conference because of the way they've been playing, in the first 6 games of the year, and they took care of business against Kansas in the second half. First half of that game was really close, and then BYU had to go to double overtime against Arizona. That was also a pretty good game. I was kind of feeling that BYU was going to go down last night, but they ended up not doing that. So BYU looks like now a top contender in this conference. And then you look at the rest of the Big 12. How about Utah blowing out Arizona State last night? What a huge statement made by Utah. This is a pretty good football team. Now, they had a bad game against Texas Tech, so it's looking like we could have a pretty good rematch between, Utah and Texas Tech in the Big 12 championship. Depending if BYU slips up somewhere. Now, I feel like Texas Tech and BYU are probably going to slip up somewhere. Nobody is going to go undefeated in this conference the rest of the way, unless Texas Tech just turns out to be a pretty dominant team in this conference, and BYU just turns out to be maybe as good as we think they were not going to be, especially after losing their starting quarterback. They have a freshman quarterback that's really capable of playing a really good, team in the future. So, yeah, Texas Tech and BYU are at the top of the rest of the Big 12. There's a ton of parity in this conference, and we saw TCU go down to Kansas State. They got blown out in that game, and then we saw Colorado beat Iowa State. So all of a sudden, Iowa State maybe is a bit overrated. So yeah, the Big 12 is starting to heat up in the rest of the Big 12, but Texas Tech and BYU are at the top. It's them here versus the rest of the Big 12, in my opinion. And yeah, it's going to be a ton of parity here in the rest of the way here in the second half of the college football season in this respective conference. So that's takeaway number 3. Let's go to takeaway number 4. I had a really tough time picking a takeaway number 4 here, to be honest, but was Florida State's win over Alabama a fluke? I think it was, to be honest. Florida State's gone downhill. I don't know what's wrong with Florida State now. This team started 3-0, and then they lose to Virginia. You thought they could turn it around, probably against a pretty good Miami team. They got blown out in that game if you watch the entire game, but the game ended up being kind of close the rest of the way because Miami kind of looked sloppy the rest of the way in that game. But if you look at the entire game, Miami was clearly the better team, and then they go down to Pittsburgh 34-31. Yeah, Florida State's win over Alabama, I had a lot of question marks, about this win now. Was it just a fluke? I think it was. Florida State doesn't look like a pretty good football team now. This team has lost 3 in a row. This team started 3-0 with a win over Alabama in week 1. That was obviously the biggest win of the entire college football season by far in the early part of the year. But in the second half, actually not in the second half of the year, as they got into conference play, Florida State's now lost 3 conference games in a row. They're 0-3, so maybe Florida State's not quite as good as we kind of expected them to be, and they're not going to turn around their season, and they're not going to make the college football playoff. Now, they can still technically win their conference if they do win out the rest of the way, but I don't know if that's going to happen, especially after the way they've been playing in the first 3 games of their conference. So, yeah, Florida State doesn't look like a pretty good football team now. Alabama's looking like a really talented football team. We saw Alabama beat Missouri 27-24. I forgot to mention that game when I did my takeaway on the SEC there a while ago. But yeah, either way, I think Florida State's win over Alabama was a fluke because this team has not played really good football in the last 3 games of the season. And they have not won a conference game just yet. It's kind of picking up right where it left off last year. They got to get a conference win some way or another, unless Mike Norvell probably gets, on the hot seat here as well. So, yeah, Florida State's win over Alabama, I was kind of questioning it over, this past week, and I think it is now a fluke. I think Florida State's not a really good team that we thought they were going to be. So that's takeaway number 4. And then we go to the final takeaway here as we head into the second half of the year. All these teams that you're seeing on this list are the teams to beat in the entire country. These 8 teams right here are the only unbeaten teams left remaining out of the Power 4. I know there's some Group of 5 teams that are still undefeated. You got Memphis that's still undefeated. We saw North Texas lose their first game of the year against USF. South Florida dominated the second half of that game. If you go back to that Friday night game, and then we still have, UNLV still undefeated in the Mountain West. So those are probably the 3 teams to beat in the Group of 5. But you look at the Power 4, BYU, Georgia Tech, Indiana, Texas A&M, Miami, Ohio State, Ole Miss, and Texas Tech. All these 8 teams in the Power 4 are the teams to beat in the entire country. These are all playoff teams as of right now. I don't know if I would call BYU and Georgia Tech playoff teams because those teams don't really have any top 25 wins. Maybe same thing for Texas A&M. I think Ole Miss might be a playoff team because they beat LSU and Tulane already, which the Tulane win is looking pretty good for them. And then Indiana with their their statement win over Oregon. This looks like the best team in the entire country. Now, Miami and Ohio State have played pretty good football as well. Ohio State's win over Texas looking a lot better. And then for Miami, their win over Florida State doesn't look as good now. And they still have the win over Florida, but they don't really have any massive wins. I mean, maybe South Florida is probably their best win. And then also Notre Dame. That's probably their best win as well. And then Texas Tech, I think this might be the best team in the Big 12. And I think they might have the best defense out of all these 8 teams. They might have the best defense in the country. So, yeah, all these 8 teams I feel like are the teams to beat in the country. They're still undefeated. You look at BYU coming up, I feel like they have to play a top 25 team in order to take them more seriously. And then Georgia Tech's going to have to get another massive win. And in Indiana, their schedule sets up the rest of the way pretty well. Texas A&M's got 3 road games coming up against, I think, they got Arkansas coming up this weekend. And then they got, Missouri and LSU both on the road. So those are going to be really tough games there for the Aggies. And then Miami's got some tough games coming up a little bit as well. Ohio State, I don't know who they have on their schedule. I mean, they got Michigan and Penn State, and that's about it. And then Ole Miss, they got to play conference games the rest of the way in the SEC. Texas Tech, I feel like will slip up somewhere, but the way that they're playing right now, I just feel like they're not going to slip up anywhere. So, yeah, all these teams are the teams to beat in the country just based off of what they've done in the first half of the year. So there are 8 Power 4 teams left undefeated in the entire college football world. So that's all my takeaways here from Week 7. What do you guys think about my takeaways? Give me your biggest takeaways from Week 7 down in the comments below. Thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned for more on the NCAA College Sports YouTube channel.